Daniel Harris is with us. Daniel, good morning to you. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, just before we get on to Manchester United tonight, did Liverpool turn their season around last night? Are they now just a Champions League team who can throw the towel in the league and concentrate, put all their eggs, the remaining egg, one egg that they have, into the Champions League basket?
Sort of. I mean, it doesn't quite work like that, in that the more games you win, probably the more you feel you're likely to win games. So I wouldn't say they turned it around last night, because that 2-0 win in the first leg meant that they could play with a bit less pressure. But, I mean, it would be silly to think that they couldn't win the Champions League, because they can. And Fabinho playing in midfield last night made a big difference to them. They're not the best team in Europe, but it's cup competition and you don't necessarily have to be. So no one will want to play them. And I'm sure that will be their focus. And it would be, I mean, they would be very, very pleased indeed if they could come out of this with the Champions League. I still think that they're not as good as Manchester City this season. They're not as good as Bayern Munich, but it's not. That would be tight games, so it's definitely possible.
Well, I mean, if we look at Real Madrid's record in the Champions League, there were very few times when, over the last decade, you would have said they were the best team in Europe, and yet they've won by far more Champions Leagues than anybody else over that period of time. If I was Klopp, that's what I would be telling everybody. I'd be on the videotrons around the training ground and in the dressing room. I'd be like, "Oh, did Real Madrid win the Champions League that year? Were they the best team?" No, they weren't.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Madrid had Modric and Kroos and Ronaldo, who are players who are miles better than the players that Liverpool have. But yeah, it is possible just to be good at winning cup competitions. And Madrid were able to do it because ultimately they had enough unbelievable individuals who would do something when they needed it to be done in the big games. Liverpool's not quite about that. Liverpool's more of a collective effort, I think, and they need the system to be working and starting to get the players back into the system. I mean, if you've got Henderson and Fabinho in midfield, the defence is, and Henderson has been injured, but the defence is going to have a lot less to do, so you're much more easily able to hide what's going on with the defence. Obviously, when you start playing the better teams towards the end of the competition, that becomes harder because you're much less likely to dominate possession. But if they get a friendly draw, then they're more than capable, and there are friendly draws to be had. I mean, Porto is there, for example. You want to avoid Paris and you want to avoid Bayern Munich, but otherwise, I'd take Liverpool to beat pretty much anyway. I mean, obviously, you don't play City either. So those are the three best teams, I think. The teams, or at least the teams that, for whatever reason, you most want to avoid, because Paris have individuals that can just kill you as well, more similar to Real Madrid, really. But the rest of the draw, you happily take, and I would take Liverpool to beat everyone else, I think, in a two-leg tie.
Even if Liverpool don't win the Champions League, Daniel, if they finish the Premier League season strong and maybe scrape into the top four, there will be a sense of excitement amongst Liverpool fans that they will definitely be back in the title race again next season. Do you see it that way?
I think I'd expect them to be in the title race next season anyway. I mean, assuming everything stays the same. I think the top four will be too much now. I don't think they're going to be able to win that many consecutive games. I mean, again, it's not impossible, because we've seen these players do it before, but they seem to have lost that extra that means you win games when you play badly, you keep winning tight games. So I'm not sure they're going to get in the Champions League, but we can't ignore the very specific circumstances of this season, and what they do next season is going to depend really on who they're able to buy, I think, and assuming the players are still there, because I guess it's possible that the better players will leave, or at least maybe Salah will leave, but no one's really got any money to buy him, so he might have to stay even if he doesn't want to. And again, the very specific circumstances of this season, there's a reason why Man United and Man City are at the top of the league. And obviously one of the reasons is they're playing the best, but also they have the biggest squads. And if you look at what United were doing, they basically they were finding ways to win games when they had all their players available. Because what happened was that Solskjaer was able to rotate from game to game, was changing 4 or 5 players from every game. And although the cohesion wasn't quite what you'd want it to be, because he was changing 4 or 5 players every game, it meant that they were fresh enough to find goals when they needed them, and that they also had options on the bench. As soon as that stopped being the case, once Pogba got injured, once Van de Beek got injured, and basically the midfielders that were fit were the only midfielders that were able to play, so they only had maybe 3 midfield players, then the results stopped coming, really, when Cavani got injured also, when they started to run out of options up front. It's not a coincidence that that was the time the form started to tail off and everything started to be much harder work. Now, Liverpool never had that. They had basically 12 or 13 players that Klopp trusted. And in this particular season, especially with the injuries and with the inability to rotate, it makes it much harder for them to produce a good level, because they brought Jota to be that rotation player so that they could start. They had 4 strikers, so they could start leaving strikers out and bringing him in and rotating like that. As soon as he got injured, that stopped being the case. And also, as we know, they play a very physical style, so to have to produce that, the same players to have to produce that every 3 days is difficult. And they're coming towards the end of the cycle, and their players are kind of not improving anymore, most of them. They're kind of 28, 29, the point where the best you can hope for is a plateau. So you put all those things together. And also, I know people laugh at Liverpool saying that they're affected by the absence of the crowd. It's not because the Anfield crowd is so dangerous and so intimidating and so terrifying and all of that nonsense. It's that certain clubs, certain particular styles of team feed off crowd action more and crowd noise more than players do. Manchester City play quite a bloodless style, and the Etihad is not renowned for its noise, so they're able to, I think they've handled playing without crowds better, whereas Liverpool do feed off the crowd because their style is that very energetic style, and anything you can get to ramp up that intensity in the players and in the team is worth something, and they've also been without that. And if you add up all those things, I mean, ultimately it'll always still be about not playing well enough, but there have been a lot of factors that are very specific and are unique to this season that have affected Liverpool, and they won't exist next season. I do think they need a couple of buys, and who knows whether without Champions League football and maybe without European football at all, those funds will be afforded to Jurgen Klopp. But if he gets them, and assuming he stays, I would definitely expect Liverpool to challenge for the title next season. That's
interesting. We had Simon Hughes from The Athletic on yesterday, and he just dropped into conversation that it was his understanding last summer they were about to realise about 60 million, or certainly the plans were to realise about 60 million by selling 3 players, one of whom would have been Origi and a couple of others, Shaqiri and I can't even remember who the third one was now at this point. But that didn't happen because there was no Bournemouth willing to spend 18 million on one of their subs all of a sudden. And that prevented them from getting the reinforcements that they needed in case there was a rainy day and then there was a monsoon. That's the economics that kind of leach out over 6 months after it happens, that we don't really fully understand. And certainly it's not an issue ever really for Man City, or it's not an issue, certainly wasn't an issue last year even for Chelsea, and it's not going to be an issue for PSG as well. And that's where the club ownership issues become most really into sharp relief. That's the future here. That the super clubs are going to...
Liverpool's owners want to take money out. They don't want to put money in. And they put some money in that they allowed Klopp to buy Alisson, and they allowed him to buy Van Dijk. I mean, that squad wasn't cobbled together for nothing. It was like there's some fantastic buys in there, and they had an unbelievable run of hitting with almost every signing. Now, to reproduce that is asking a lot, because that is unusual. I mean, it's almost unprecedented in the history of football how well they did with those consecutive signings around that time. And to do that again is, I mean, it would be surprising, because it's just so unusual. The owners aren't there they're not sugar daddies. They're not there to launder reputations. They're not there to launder money. They're there to take money out. And to say that, they couldn't buy players because they didn't sell those players that you mentioned is true, but ultimately it's only part of the truth, because they are rich enough to put money in. They just don't want to, and they chose not to, but they could have done. And you see it. You saw it with United, actually, when they won the treble. That summer, they signed Mark Bosnich on a free. I think they added Mikel Silvestre and a little bit later, Massimo Taibbi, but they didn't strengthen when they were on top. And although they were able to still eke out 2 more league titles with the genius of Alex Ferguson and the unbelievable players that they already had, they didn't get that close in Europe again, because you need to strengthen when you're on top. And that's the best way of doing it. And Liverpool opted not to do that. And I mean, I'm sure Jurgen Klopp wanted to do that, and he must have known that. Just to always add at least something significant keeps it fresh. And I guess they did add Thiago, but it felt always like they were adding Thiago because he was cheap. he didn't really seem like the player that they needed. And it was actually, I mean, again, it was extreme. I don't want to compare everything to Man United, and I'm sure I'd get people in my Twitter ads, if I was still allowed on Twitter, saying, oh, blah, 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 United this, United that. But it is really very similar to when United signed Veron, because United at that point needed a lot picker. They needed a number 10, and instead they signed a brilliant number 6. And that's what Liverpool did with Thiago. And Liverpool's problem throughout this, not problem, I mean, it's problem, I use that in an advised sense, because they haven't had that many problems. They finished second in the league, they won the league, and they won the Champions League. But the thing that when you looked at that squad, you saw that they didn't quite have was they lacked a bit of guard and a little bit of creativity in midfield. And that's why I say it's a lot that Klopp tried to sign Fekir and he couldn't. And then they ended up signing Thiago. But Thiago's not really the kind of player who's gonna pick things out around the box. He's not going to score. He's not going to contribute very many goals. And what Liverpool needed was number 10. And that was the same as United when they signed Van Nistelrooy because they wanted a proper world-class centre-forward. But they also signed Veron. And what Veron wanted to do was Veron wanted to take the ball off the back four and wanted to spray passes around, but they already had Roy Keane doing that. And what they really needed was someone who could play on the half turn, someone who was able to beat men and pick those passes on the edge of the box. And they didn't buy that. And that's what's happened with Thiago, I think, who I'm absolutely certain will play better if in a midfield with if he's able to play in the midfield with Henderson and Fabinho, or Fabinho and Wijnaldum. I'm sure they'll start to get more out of Thiago, but ultimately I don't really think he was the player that they needed. They signed him because he was good and he was cheap, but that still doesn't make him right.
Danny Lee were on with us a couple of weeks ago talking about your hazy / exciting memories from Milan back in the day. There's been a lot written this week about that 2007 clash. This might not be on that level, but who knows what could happen over the next couple of weeks. In terms of where the two clubs have gone, it does seem like Manchester United, this is going to be a stepping stone. This is going to be their last season in the Europa League for quite some time. At the same time, I presume Manchester United fans would love to win this trophy.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to win any trophy. Better United sides than this one have played in the Europa League, but it's fair to say, but I guess only when they got booted out of the Champions League first, rather like these guys. My Milan experience was actually 2010. The one in 2007 feels like, to me, as a United supporter now I'm talking, in my top probably 2 of European Cups that United should have won that got away. The general narrative around that has been United were just outplayed by Kaká and Gattuso and Pirlo and Seedorf, but it's not exactly like that. What actually happened, I thought that season, I still think that season, United were the best team in Europe. But by the time that Milan tie came, because they had that more of a Liverpool situation, they only had really 11 or 12 players. They were exhausted by the time that tie came around, and Ferdinand and Vidic missed the home leg. United were 1-0 in the home leg, and then I think Hines and Brown banged into each other. And Milan basically scored their 2 goals, not because Kaká was unbelievable, although Kaká wasn't an unbelievable player, and I'm not trying to denigrate him at all and say that he wasn't. But Milan won that tie because United didn't have a defence in the first leg. And then by the time the second leg came, I think Vidic maybe played but wasn't fit, and they got battered in that second leg. But if they'd have had Vidic and Ferdinand for the first leg, it wouldn't have gone down like that. They didn't, and that means Milan deserved to beat them, and Milan were better than them. I'm not saying that wasn't the case, but that wasn't the undressing that is commonly held to be the case. Anyhow, tonight it's a difficult one for United actually, because Milan haven't got a lot of players, and United don't have a lot of players, and United also have a hard game at the weekend. They've got to play West Ham at home, and were they to win that West Ham game the way that other fixtures were, they'd probably be quite a long way of the way to be getting into, to be close and to be sure, or getting close to sure of the top 4. And at that point, then the cup games become the biggest games for Solskjaer, who I'm sure his ultimate brief is getting the top 4 and then worry about the rest afterwards. Which was definitely what we saw at the end of last season when they rested players for the Chelsea Cup semi-final. United Milan, still, you just hear the names and you kind of gets the adrenaline pumping, even if it isn't the best level of United and Milan. I think that United will probably be feeling pretty good about themselves after what they did at the weekend, because what they did at the weekend was they didn't just win at Man City, but they produced a proper performance where you can watch it and you can look at every aspect of that performance and say that is the performance of a proper team, of a team that knows what it was doing, the way that they pressed, the way that they coordinated the press, the way that they counter-pressed. the way that they attacked, the way that they dominated the ball when things were going their way in the game. I mean, it was great. Well, I mean, and whether they can produce that again, because they're going to need to produce something good at the weekend as well, and whether they make any changes for this one, because there will be players, I'm sure Ole Solskjaer would like to rest. I'm sure he would prefer to give Luke Shaw a rest. I'm sure he'd prefer to give Bruno Fernandes a rest. I mean, that won't happen. Rashford's injured. So it will probably be more or less the same team, and then probably more or less the same team again at the weekend with perhaps Rashford or Cavani involved. I mean, that team should be too good for Milan, who aren't particularly good even at full strength and don't have anything like full strength available. So you would expect them to go to San Siro with an advantage, but you have to earn it. I mean, United have lost to way, way worse teams than Milan this season, and Milan will come to United expecting to get a result.
Does the manner of the victory on Sunday, Daniel, give you just a little bit of extra hope that they can win this sort of competition, that with a specific set of challenges against a specific opposition, Solskjaer is underrated as a manager in terms of actually figuring those things out?
I think United are the best team in this competition. It doesn't mean they'll win the competition, because it's a cup competition and there are absolutely loads of teams still left that could beat them. They could lose to Arsenal, they could lose to Tottenham, and that's just the English teams. So you can never rely on winning a cup competition, and they're not so good at this point that you would just assume that they're going to beat teams who are a bit less good than they are, because you've constantly seen them losing to teams who are a lot less good than they are. But they will know that they're the best team in this competition, and they would expect themselves to win this competition. They should have won it last season. One of the best performances under Solskjaer was the first hour against Sevilla. But the things that cost them and the things that keep costing them is the inability to finish ruthlessly. And they don't have really a ruthless finisher in the team. I mean, perhaps Cavani, but he hasn't really. He scored some great goals, and he scored some great goals at good times. But he's not a level of finisher of the guys who you see. Like, he's not a Haaland or an Mbappe level of finisher who, if you're playing against their team, you expect them to score at some point. He's not as good as they are. So the defending has improved a lot recently. But that doesn't mean that you feel that you're clear of the defensive balls-ups that just turn up here, because they've been going on for so long. So although Maguire's playing, I thought Maguire against City, that was one of the best games he's had for United. And Wan-Bissaka's played much better recently. And obviously Luke Shaw's now a good player, amazingly. So they are defending better, but that doesn't mean that you would assume that they're not going to make any kind of ricket at a crucial moment, just as you're not going to assume that you're going to get ruthless finishing out of Anthony Martial in a semi-final or a final. So the things that need to be in place for you to be sure that a team are going to win big games, I don't think United still have, but they do have the best individuals probably or at least as good, the most good individuals of any team that's left. And they are the best team of what's left, but they're not the best team by enough, and they're not a good enough team by enough for anyone to assume that they're going to win anything.
Daniel, good stuff. Enjoy the game tonight. Cheers.
You too. I'll see you again. Bye.
Daniel Harris giving us his thoughts on United Milan tonight. We'll obviously be talking about it on the show tomorrow, and we'll be keeping you up to date on it across Off the Ball on News Talk tonight as well.